At 6:03 in the English Channel, a 3,620-ton steel warship, the Russian Admiral Grigorovich, surged into a reckless cutoff maneuver just meters from the bow of the British support vessel RFA Tidesforce, forcing an emergency evasive turn to avoid a collision measured in fractions of a second. Failure here would not be a bruise on a hull. It would be a rupture in Europe's maritime lifeline, with supply chains, fuel movements, and Allied readiness all collapsing into chaos. If the Grigorovich escapes the controlled zone, it buys Russia a 45-minute window to vanish into the Atlantic, and the United Kingdom loses control of its own doorstep with consequences that cannot be undone. In that instant, every instrument, every command decision, and every sensor reading hangs frozen mid-process, yet with the channel holding its breath between a near miss and a disaster. Before we dive in, comment where you are watching from and click subscribe. We should care because this is not an abstract contest of power. It is a confrontation measured in lives, hours, dollars, and seconds. A single decision at sea, the choice to close range and force an emergency maneuver, can trigger cascading failures across ships, aircraft, submarines, and command networks that take days or millions of dollars to repair. This moment matters now because it permanently changes what Russia can attempt in one of the world's busiest straits and what the alliance must assume about deception, intimidation, and escalation in contested waters. At 2:38 a.m., the Admiral Grigorovich moved with its lights blazing while activating a sophisticated automatic identification system spoofing capability. This created a matrix of phantom civilian ships on radar, concealing the actual convoy like a magician hiding a real object inside a swirl of identical decoys. If you look at the tactical display, you will notice 3 ships that suddenly appear as 12 bright contacts, interlaced and moving in a pattern designed to paralyze decision-making. Their command center issued an ultimatum. Any attempt at intervention, it warned, would constitute an act of direct war. This was not the first test of London's nerves. High-intensity lasers had previously harassed Wildcat pilots. Now the escalation had shifted to physical attack. With the British fleet stretched thin, only RFA Tidesforce stood in the way, and the Grigorovich exploited that gap with a close-range maneuver measured in meters, not miles. In response, Boeing P-8 Poseidon aircraft launched from Scotland and Eurofighter Typhoon fighters from Coningsby Air Base surged into combat readiness. The brutal calculation remained: Russia was just 45 minutes away from leaving the controlled zone and disappearing into the Atlantic. The clock was not symbolic. It was a countdown with operational, political, and strategic weight. At 2:45 a.m., the standoff shifted to the silent realm of signals and sensors. In fact, the Russian fleet had fallen into a digital trap long before the first engine was started at the Yantar shipyard. Every electronic trace of the fleet had been detected by U.S. satellite intelligence systems and the British underwater sensor network the moment it left port. That Moscow was moving through a trap set by the alliance. To conceal the oil tankers, the Admiral Grigorovich began a large-scale electronic deception operation. The frigate emitted a thick multispectral smoke screen while launching 10 sophisticated radar decoys. These active response decoys simulated the radar cross-section of a 4,000-ton warship, like throwing 10 cardboard cutouts of a car onto a road to confuse a camera that can only see shapes, not substance. At 2:50 a.m., international radar screens multiplied the night fleet instantly. 3 ships became 12 identical bright spots moving within an interlaced matrix intended to blind the tankers and fracture the alliance's coordination. Their response was a demonstration of network superiority. Low-altitude surveillance assets activated synthetic aperture radar, or SAR. While unlike traditional radar, SR pulses penetrate smoke, to reconstruct a high-resolution 3D model of every object on the water surface, much like a medical scanner, building a detailed image from energy that passes through tissue rather than bouncing off skin. Meanwhile, flying in the stratosphere, Northrop Grumman's MQ-4C Triton, the U.S. Navy surveillance drone, deployed long-range infrared sensors to hunt for thermal signatures. The Triton distinguished the massive thermal output from ship engines, something cold radar buoys cannot simulate. The knot was tied as all data synchronized via the Link 16 network. On the tactical screen, the 3D structural data was compared with the infrared thermal map. The truth emerged. 10 Russian decoys appeared as hollow ghosts. Without firing a single bullet, the US and the UK exposed Russia's deception and pinpointed the fleet's actual coordinates. Russian command was completely exposed. A sophisticated deception became transparent to an invisible intelligence network built to see through smoke, noise, and illusion. At 2:52 a.m., Russia escalated the standoff in the skies. From the fortress of Kaliningrad, 2 Russian Air Force Sukhoi Su-30SM multi-role fighters entered international airspace. The lead Russian fighter targeted a British Eurofighter Typhoon from Coningsby Air Base, executing a sharp brake turn with high G-forces just a few meters from the Typhoon's nose. The Su-30SM cut across the British aircraft's flight path. The objective was to blast high-velocity jet wash into the air intake and cause catastrophic engine failure. And this was a high-risk provocation aimed at forcing retreat through physical intimidation. The British pilot relied on 21st-century ingenuity rather than 20th-century brute force. He ignored the aerodynamic threat, maintained level flight, and activated the BAE Systems Striker 2 digital cockpit. This system used eye-tracking sensors to synchronize direct-fire weapon targeting with the pilot's line of sight, like a precision cursor that follows a surgeon's gaze rather than a joystick that follows clumsy hands. Simultaneously, the Leonardo Captor EAESA radar on the Typhoon activated burn-through mode. By concentrating electromagnetic energy into a high-intensity beam, it penetrated the Su-30's L-175V jamming devices. Russian electronic jamming became harmless, yielding a clear target lock-on. The outcome was decided in an instant. Even when the Su-30SM was at a 90-degree angle to the Typhoon's nose, the Striker 2 display projected a digital target lock-on to the Russian aircraft's fuselage. Beneath the aircraft's wing, the MBDA Meteor Beyond Visual Range missile confirmed a high off-bore sight lock-on. The Meteor's ramjet engine ensured an inescapable zone 3 times larger than that of Russian missiles. The Su-30SM's cockpit suddenly blared a continuous locked warning from an unimaginable angle. Russia realized its technology was obsolete. Physical aggression met a system capable of destruction with a single glance, revealing the deadly gap between crude maneuvering and digital sensor integration. At 3:02 a.m., while a fierce conflict raged in the skies, a far deadlier game unfolded in the dark depths below. Moscow had been preparing an underwater ambush long before the squadron entered the disputed zone. A Kilo-class diesel-electric submarine, dubbed the Oceanic Black Hole for its extreme stealth, had silently departed the Baltisk base a week earlier. To avoid detection, it maintained an extremely low speed just below the deafening sonic boom of civilian cargo ships, masking its presence with the engine noise of merchant vessels. Russia initiated the underwater assault by deploying a series of noisemaker decoys. These devices emitted a distinctive acoustic fingerprint, mimicking the propeller noise of a U.S. Virginia-class submarine. The objective was to trick Alliance sonar operators into chasing phantom targets, creating a clear path for the Kilo-class submarine to maneuver and potentially attack British surface ships. And this was a sophisticated ploy designed to exploit the limits of traditional passive listening sensors. However, the Predator had become the prey over the past 48 hours. The USS Virginia, a U.S. Navy fast attack submarine, had been tailing the Kilo since it passed through the Skagerrak Strait. Instead of falling for acoustic decoys, the Alliance team deployed a network of multi-static sonobuoys dropped by a Boeing P-8 Poseidon aircraft. Imagine this as an underwater laser security grid. Instead of merely hearing the Kilo's sounds, these sensors tracked how its massive steel hull interrupted sound pulses transmitted between the buoys. Like a shadow crossing a grid of light beams, the Kilo was no longer invisible. It was a moving black silhouette within an illuminated digital grid. Each sonar buoy acted as a mesh eye, capturing the submarine not by its sound, but by how it disrupted the surrounding environment. Realizing the Alliance's trap was closing in, the Russian commander was forced to abort the mission. The Kilo executed an emergency deep dive to avoid a hull-to-hull collision with the pursuing Virginia-class submarine. The Black Hole was expelled from its hiding place, stripped of its primary weapon, silence, and forced into a desperate retreat. At 3:15 a.m., as the Russian task force began to form its battle formation, the U.S. Carrier Strike Group immediately deployed its ace in the hole, the Boeing EA-18G Growler. This specialized electronic warfare aircraft silently approached from high altitude, cloaked in darkness, and waited for the exact microsecond the Russian fleet began transmitting to launch a devastating digital counterattack. The Russian attack began when the Admiral Grigorovich activated its internal EWTK-255 system, coordinating seamlessly with a Vishnya-class signal reconnaissance ship lurking nearby. They created an electromagnetic vice, a high-powered jamming assault designed to sweep and overwrite all of the Alliance's communication frequencies. Their objective was to turn the waters of the English Channel into an absolute information blackout, paralyzing the command structures of the US and the UK. However, the twist was that the Alliance never lost communication. The EA-18G Growler aircraft used the new Generation A LQ-249 jamming equipment, a system so intelligent that it learned the patterns of Russian jamming pulses and frequencies in less than 3 minutes. Instead of merely blocking signals, the NGJ launched a sophisticated reverse hack. It used the Russians' own jamming beams as carrier waves to inject streams of junk data and fake combat information directly back into the Russian command network, like turning a burglar's crowbar into a tool that opens his own safe. The result was a complete technical reversal. Instead of the US-British fleet being blacked out, the Russian command center was suddenly flooded with deceptive signals and misleading information generated by their own hardware. To prevent catastrophic server crashes and permanent hardware damage from the Alliance's countermeasures, Russian operators were forced to urgently shut down all EW equipment. The hunters became the hunted. The very weapons Russia intended to use to blind the Alliance were turned into a Trojan horse, leaving their entire fleet electronically blind and completely defenseless. At 3:25 a.m., with Russian fleet sensor systems knocked out,